So, welcome back, everyone. We hope everybody enjoyed their break. So, we know it's a very hard time after having a very delicious lunch and very interesting. Welcome back, everyone. So we know it's rather hard to focus again after the lunch break, having all this intense discussion during the morning and also a very delightful lunch. However, one might argue that we placed this panel here on purpose right after the lunch break, either to wake you up by the discussion or just to avoid answering to prominent questions as they have been posed at least in the chat and during the discussions held during the lunch break with regards to specific techniques. Now, the name of the panel is Data Protection by Design and by Default Techniques in Data Spaces. And as you can imagine, the aim is to cover the data protection by design and by default. Now, the element of techniques there should not prelude the fact that we will talk only about technical or organizational measures. There has been a long discussion in the chat of WebEx throughout the day with regards to a specific technique or a specific group of techniques on anonymization. But before going toward down to a very specific technique, we need to consider what is the process in operation all about and what are the types of data we are sharing and with whom, for what reason, and what we want to achieve with this technique. So the answer is not straightforward out of X, Y, and Z picking which is the best, because fortunately or unfortunately, the answer will be it depends. It's a very, let's say, popular reply, but in fact, it's the only one that somebody can give you when you're being asked a very specific question without information on the context. So the most obvious reply should be, tell me what you want to do, what type of data, what type of entities are involved, and for what reason you want to share this data, since we're discussing about the data spaces. And then perhaps I could pinpoint in 1, 2, or 3 set of measures, set of techniques, because we also need to take into account that one technical organizational measure by itself cannot solve the problems we're trying to address. Usually, it's a set of technical organizational measures or a set of measures that is fit for the purpose that we are deploying them for. So without any further delay, I would like to give the floor to the 3 panelists. I'm very fortunate to have the company of 3 very experienced ladies in the panel. So I will start with Ms. Marie-Charlotte Bonnet, who has extensive experience in the field of data protection and privacy. She's a member of Data Protection Engineering Board at AEPD, and she has worked in the past with very big organizations, both in the private and public sector, including Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL. Marie-Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, and I hope we're going to trigger a really accountable and focused discussion. I will be really brief because we don't have that much time for the introduction. But I will drill down immediately into how data protection and data spaces have some kind of specific nodes that make sense. We build on the GDPR. It's true that, I don't know about you, but we were discussing that with a former colleague a few minutes ago. It's really difficult now to cope with all germinating texts, regulation, specific framing or frameworks for new practices. Data spaces is for sure a challenge as a concept, as a notion, but we can build on what we already have and try to apprehend this new notion with something we are good at. That is to say, it's been 5 years we've been training for the GDPR, so let's see how it goes. So I will start from, really the basics. So the European data strategy has been setting some notions around what should be, basically, the processing of data in data spaces. As you see on screen, it's not mine, it's an EU Commission design. There are some few notions that we are completely clear with, but it entails lots of reflections. So for instance, data can flow within the EU and across sectors. Of course, on the principle and theoretically, we all agree, but then when it comes to security, you have this challenge of having the maximized security along with the highest quality of data. And see if you go on the other side, the light blue one notion, availability of high quality data to create and innovate. Of course, if I blur too much, if I put too much noise around the data, then its relevance is going to be vanishing a bit. More security, less quality. So basically, it's really keeping the right balance that is always, the purpose. To do that, I will go up. I'm sorry. It's a difficult movement for the slides. I will go along with you. I'm sorry, so, yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that, the blonde one. Making public sector, so I will just try to summarize with you where we stand regarding those core principles that we can root our reflection on, anchor our reflection on. So those core principles are defined in the text, so the DGA and other notions. First of all, the ambition number one for data spaces is making public sector data available for reuse. But of course, it includes sharing of personal data and of data from businesses. For doing that, there is this new notion of intermediary that is going to be added. The principle of altruistic sharing of data is also, someone to work on. Having some predictable rules and standard technical organizational measures. I will stop with this list with, to my view, one of the most relevant one, which is interoperability. Because in the end, if you think about it, there are two challenges for data spaces and data protection. So the first one is access to. I have a data space for a sector, so for instance, let's take health sector, and I have access to this one, which is highly relevant and I have to secure. But then, I think it's kind of pointless to have such a data space if at the end of the day there is an interoperability problem, so that you have something growing bigger, safer, most relevant, and highly qualitative. So basically, interoperability seems to me as being, the poor children of the GDPR. It was a brand new right, the only brand new one, actually, and somehow desperately in need of being defined operationally and in practice. Without being too long, I'm sorry, because I didn't put on screen what I was speaking about. But if you see here, this is my summary. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just moving with difficulty. So let's go to the next slide, if I can. I'm sorry. Okay, so the accountability building blocks. So I will detail in the ENISA report we've been happy to work on together. I've been lucky enough to work on accountability. So I will skip this one and get directly to the last slide so that I don't go too long. We identified 10 building blocks that could be helpful for, in detail, supporting those brilliant initiatives and having an accountable plus operationally materially possible set of processes being set. So the first building block I hope you see on screen is the identification of responsibilities. Of course, we know we speak about data holders and we have users' obligations, but I think in practice, challenge number one is identifying such responsibilities. Challenge number two is data sharing effective internal governance, because we have to switch model. We had an internal model with our own cooking, difficult enough in cross-department discussion. And now we're going to have to move towards, working along with other partners. So this internal governance has to be reshaped so that internally it meets the demanding needs of the data spaces. The third one is, of course, data sharing cooperative external governance. If I have, to prepare internally for external cooperation, then I have to frame it also externally. The fourth one is a sound data sharing program. So, of course, most of us, we are supposed to handle and draft those privacy management programs. And in that, we are supposed now to revamp whatever is needed, tweak it substantially, plus add a section on data sharing. The fifth one, again, proposed as being identifiable in the ENISA report, is designing specific data sharing accountability tools, because, of course, sharing is a different model. I'm afraid you won't see the last one, but believe me, I will state it out loud. The sixth one is balancing risk mitigation and security objectives. This is actually my first point, and I think it's the most relevant one, at least to my view. That is to say, how do I tip this balance so that I ensure sufficient security without wasting the full granularity and specific relevance of data sets? And I think this is really, the core challenge. The seventh one, ethical assessment of envisaged data sharing. Let's not forget that we are in an AI world. Data holder and data receivers should have transparent information sharing. And I think this is one of the most operational demanding things, because sharing data internally is already difficult. So externally, in a transparent way, it's going to be really quite a good set of discussions coming up. The almost last one, contractual framing of data sharing practices with access and interoperability. And the last one, finally, nothing new here, transparency towards individuals. But what's going to be challenging is, when do I have to be transparent? Data spaces are supposed to be de-identified, but they're not all the time, and re-identification is still possible. So anyway, to start the conversation and give it a first go, I wanted to remind you of those building blocks, but I'm more than happy to let my colleagues deep dive into the topic.
Thank you very much, Marie-Charlotte. And now I would like to give the floor to our second panelist, Ms. Irene Camara, who is an assistant professor at Tilburg University, and she's also a transatlantic technology law forum fellow at Stanford Law School, and also an affiliated researcher at Vrije Universiteit in Brussels. Irene, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I would like to have the deck. Where do I? There. Okay. Okay, that's Marie-Charlotte's blocks. Okay. So, hello everyone, also from my side. I'm very excited to be on this panel. I was invited to talk about technical standards. Building on what Marie-Charlotte already said, we need to use the tools that we already have from the GDPR, and technical standards are one of the tools that has been developed in parallel and taking into account data protection requirements. And specifically, when we talk about technical standards in the area of data protection, we see that there has been a lot of activity as regards technical standards in the area of data protection by design and by default. And we talk about standards because standards are tools. They are good practices developed by organizations for organizations. They don't offer legal compliance necessarily, so every organization still needs to be compliant with the law, so they are still responsible to comply. But technical standards, as it is already announced today by OVE, for example, so the representative of the European Commission, they are a tool that the Commission usually introduces in all those new acts. So it's also part of the DGA, so the recital 23 says, well, all the different actors, they need to take into account to adhere to technical standards, codes of conduct, and certifications at union level. Yes, I'm really trying. Okay, great, thanks. That would be great. Okay, so speaking of the work that has already been done, I have on this slide some of the initiatives at European and international level. So several organizations, so the European Standards Organization, CEN and CENELEC, not ETSI in this case, they have developed 3 standards on data protection by design and by default. One is the main standard that was published in 2022, and it actually took 7 years to be developed because the European Commission asked the European Standards Organizations to develop standards on the basis of the GDPR and data protection by design and by default. So they came up with these standards, which includes high-level requirements of what an organization needs to do when they want to align with Article 25 of the GDPR. Again, this is not approved compliance, necessarily compliant with the GDPR, but it does offer some of the steps to comply with the legal obligation. Then if you look on the right side, so top right, we have 2 technical reports. One is already published and the other is under development. And those reports specify how those high-level requirements of the European standard on data protection by design and by default can be applied into specific cases, in case of video surveillance and then biometrics. And I will pose a question mark here. Perhaps it could be an idea that there is a new technical report on data spaces. So how to apply data protection by design and by default standard in the case of data spaces. Then the international organization, so ISO, and the consumer committee of ISO called COPOLCO developed a privacy by design standard for consumer goods and services. And also there's a bunch of standards that are developed in collaboration with ISO and IEC, specifically providing techniques for privacy engineering. Go to the next slide. Thanks. So if we would now bring the discussion back to data spaces, and we try to take an oversimplified view of the different components of a data space, being a governance, organizational layer, a regulatory compliance layer in case that this data space falls under the scope of the Digital Governance Act. And of course, a very important component, as we heard in the previous panels, is the technical layer. Looking at the standards that I presented in the previous slide, we can already get some guidance both at the governance regulatory level and the technical level. So the governance regulatory level would mean that if an organization looks at those standards, we learn how to, in the beginning, determine which are the relevant technical requirements for data protection by design and by default to apply in the data space, how to keep a record of processing activities, and so on and so forth. So there are different processes and mechanisms that are established in those standards. Then at the technical side, there are also some relevant mechanisms, but I have to admit that the data protection standards that the organizations have been developing mostly focus on policies and processes, and not so much on a specific technique. Of course, there are standards that are developed on, for example, as I have on the slide, on secure multi-party computation developed by ISO, but these are not specific to data protection by design or privacy engineering. So it's not such a straightforward answer. For sure, we can look at standards to get some guidance, but there are, of course, also some challenges. So looking at the challenges, the data protection standards on data protection by design and by default that already exist focus on a single organization. They don't look at the whole ecosystem, like it would be very useful to look at in the case of a data space, and looking at the different actors and the whole processing activity. But they look at one single organization. What does this organization need to do? What kind of measures need to take in order to start building a data protection by design, by default approach within the product or the system that they are developing? So this overview over the different actors and the complex landscape, I think it's currently missing. And then more modern concepts like this computed data approach that we already saw in the guidelines of the AEPD on data spaces. So instead of transmitting or downloading the data, actually reversing the process and making data, making the computation result available in a way that you don't share the data. These concepts are not present in the data protection standards that I talked about. So there are different ways that we can go forward, but this is something that we can discuss during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene, for providing us with this very useful overview. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Isabel Barbera, co-founder of Rite, which is a consultancy company based in the Netherlands, specialized in trustworthy AI and in AI privacy and security risk. She has also published in 2022 The Plot for AI, an open source artificial intelligence risk assessment tool, which contains a library of a certain number of AI risks and relevant mitigation recommendations. So Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prokopius. Well, I don't have slides, so I will save the hassle of having to. Yeah, I wanted to kind of, I've done kind of a semantic threat modeling analysis here for what I've heard today. We have talked about trust, about synergies, interoperability. And the thing is that, I mean, data space is something that is happening already years ago. Now we have the attention, especially, and I'm really happy from the privacy community. And I think because this happened, especially in the world of the supply chain, logistics, now we are moving into the health sector, having implications more with personal data. But I'm missing the picture, really the synergy with eventually the data subjects of the users. I mean, when we look into coalitions for data spaces, for instance, and there are different countries, there's a lot of some focus on the societal impact, for instance, but always looking in innovation. So how can we really create impact on society, but not about what could be the adverse impact for society, and not too much attention for privacy. So, like I said, I miss in that synergy really the involvement of really the data subjects, or eventually the users. So, relating all the words, if we're going to trust, to synergies, interoperability, I think there's something that relates everything. So if you want to create trust, eventually you need to be transparent and create an understanding. So that is something that I see in practice. No matter if we have a technical understanding, you also need to have an understanding of what type of value you want for data, and that is one of the challenges that we also see in practice. And not all the parties want the same from the data. Data scientists maybe want to get some insights, specific insights, and maybe data stewards want to see something different. So these type of discussions are happening, and without agreeing on a common interest, then that becomes a challenge. But for trust, you also need safety. You also need to feel safe. And for that, of course, we have technical means. So it's really good to promote privacy engaging technologies, for instance. You see in practice a lot happening with secure multi-party computation, decentralization, trying to ways to do the, like Irene mentioned, to do the computational operations at the source in a way that you don't really have access to the data, but only to that output. Anonymization techniques. So there's a lot to be mentioned here. But is it are pets really offering that safety when in the end we need that common agreement, and that is not happening yet. We have maybe a role playing here that has not been mentioned very often today, the data intermediary. I mean, also mentioned in the DGA. I'm not sure if later maybe we will talk a bit more about that. But that figure, could that specific role bring more agreement between all the parties? Is that really the role that is going to fulfill, and who is going to do that? I mean, there's some frameworks like in the Gaia-X which you have this role of the trust anchors. that is like chosen by different participants. I mean, who's gonna choose the role of data intermediary? Is it gonna be decided at national level, member state? Who's gonna have that responsibility eventually, and how are we gonna trust eventually all these parties? And we have also other challenges, data subject rights, and not only in data spaces, but how can we really embed data subject rights in the discussion, in the design of a data space? Also a challenge. Regarding even competition, I mean, this cost, operational cost, how are SMEs also cope up with the challenge? And also data fragmentation. We see it even at national level, different initiatives for data spaces. Are we all gonna, in Europe, align to really create the right framework that it's gonna protect us all and give us that innovative benefit that we all expect there? Interoperability needs standards, so that's clear from a technical perspective, but it's beyond the technicalities. We need also governance from a legal perspective, from an organizational perspective, and eventually link that there to accountability. So who is accountable? Who is really identifying the risks? Who is mitigating those risks? Even we are used to the data privacy impact assessment. Who is really going to perform that assessment? Who's going to be responsible? All together, are we going to create a new framework working process? How are we going to do all this together in such an ecosystem? And I wanted to finalize with, it's like an acronym called FAIR that is used in data spaces very often. So meaning findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And I think if you look at the words all really focus on data itself, probably we need a CE at the end, like comparable and ethical, just to make it probably more complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three of you. We heard a little bit, just to attempt to summarize a little bit the discussion so far before opening the floor to the in-house participants and, of course, the remote participants for any questions. We heard a little bit some basic principles that we need to consider when design and developing a data space. Then we heard what is currently available, what we already have in terms of good practices or technical standards already developed, so which are the already cooked and well-proven recipes that we can follow. But then again, what are the additional questions that need to be answered or considerations on top of the high-level design principles that we mentioned at the very beginning? So it seems that we are still not very confident to whether we are on the right track where everything can work as we already know it, or we need to start reinventing the wheel and go towards a direction where we need to start exploring again in order to, at least from the GDPR perspective, address all the requirements and the considerations from the early stages of developing a data space. Any questions from the audience to the panelists or even to myself? Please. If you could please identify also yourself, introduce yourself, I mean, and perhaps if you have any specific preference to the panelists that you would like to address your question to.
My name is Gabriel Lopez. I'm from Microsoft. First of all, thank you very much to the panelists. This has been very, very interesting. One of the topics that I have encountered in working particularly in open data conversations is that in many cases, I have seen that there's a gap between the understanding of what the regulation entails to create open data sets, for example, in a research institute or in a healthcare environment, and what does the experts in that particular hospital or research center have. And it seems to me that it will be required, on top of the very important topics that you have discussed, also a work stream to outreach those experts that need to get the right knowledge on the field to start working on the very basic things around creating this type of data sets. Indeed, we need to work on high quality data sets, but there is still, in my view, some level of outreach that we need to transfer lots of knowledge at the granular level for even start working on interoperability or all the criteria of what you have mentioned. I'm wondering if you have the same experience, or do you see also an avenue of work in that area? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's really, I think the biggest challenge is to define when you have to tweak, when to have to substantially review and revise, and when you have to create a brand new process. So for instance, in those 10 pillars, which we started identifying for being accountable and having, you know, strong data spaces, meaning high security but high quality of data. The fourth and the fifth pillars, and building blocks were around, you know, the sections to add in the privacy management programs I'm supposed to have since GDPR, and also designing specific tools. So I think, again, there were lots of reasons for saying there are no good intentions, there are only good tools or good mechanisms. So I guess the point you refer to is exactly that. That is to say, when should I tweak my privacy management program so that I embed in all my trainings, in all my internal outreaches, a spot on data spaces, or at least for all those for which it would be relevant? Or when do I say, okay, basically it changes the way we're going to process data, store data, give access to data. Interoperability is not going to be a side topic, but absolutely central. So how do we get reorganized? So I think, again, it depends on the business model, on the data at stake, and all those persons involved. But again, and it might be accountability biased, but it starts all with setting the right program and defining the right tools for the right people. So basically, it's kind of a global answer, but it depends on the sector. But I'm happy to let my colleagues elaborate.
Recognize what you mentioned. I mean, I think we are at this moment in a kind of a roller coaster. A lot is going on with data regulations. We all need to catch up. Also at national level, not only the DGA, but also open data at national level, public sector, private sector. So there's so many things to also align and to understand, to really give the right advice there. So I really recognize in that sense what you say. That probably we will need some time or maybe some more guidance from authorities to really understand the ecosystem, because it's complex. Yeah.
Thank you very much. If I may, Irene, would you like to add something, please?
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of responsibility of an initiative of the people that are creating the platforms. I mean, they have to make the tools available and information, as we saw earlier in the presentation from JRC, to provide answers and tools to the people who are going to use the data spaces. So it's not only own responsibility to look for information, but it should be provided as a package with the access to the data space.
Thank you very much. I only would like to add the fact that the concept of data spaces, it is meant to address the problem or the situation where data cannot be shared as open data. So we can start, or I started my way of thinking when you formulated your question from that point, since it entails that something couldn't take place the way they were, as if the data sets were meant to be shared as open data. And then my fellow colleagues here complimented on the different components that need to be addressed, but trying to come back to what they were saying earlier with regards to we identified, or they attempted to identify, at least this is how I perceived it, some of the considerations, but then we need to go back and see what we already know and which are the questions we need to answer. So, as Isabel said, the roller coaster, I would say it's a roller coaster where we sometimes need to go back and see how we're addressing similar problems, but in a new context. I know it might sound complicated, For example, Irene and Isabel mentioned secure multi-party computation. I'm not convinced whether it is the right technology. I'm not saying it is not, but I would need to go and discuss with Marie-Charlotte, for example, what are the accountability principles or what is the accountability level that we want to demonstrate, and also understand whether the data user in the end, if it is somebody that we know beforehand or somebody that we might find out along the way after, as a data holder, we have shared the data. So I'm trying to say that it has a lot of variables, which now all of them seem moving. Perhaps in the future, some of them become something like a de facto, so it's easier to answer. But it's not something that we can answer straightforward without taking some steps back and considering what we know out of experience or good practices, or what kind of information we are missing with regard to the processing operation itself. Please.
Yeah, I think we mentioned the secure multi-party computation as one of the techniques available, because it kind of solves one part of the problem about sharing data and who has access to what. Of course, it doesn't solve the problem of data subject rights, exercising data subject rights to the outcome of the computation, right? So how can you make sure that you can access or erase data in these kind of cases? So it's certainly not a solution that covers everything. Yeah.
Indeed, many thanks, Irene, for that. Any additional question, please? Yes, for the remote participants. In the meantime, I'm also checking if there is any question posed online.
Thank you very much. And taking advantage of these backgrounds on the panel, you were talking about secure multi-party computation. And, well, I think we know that the maturity or the technology readiness level for these technologies is at least low, so to say, or doubtful. So, Irene, you mentioned about the standards. Some of them are mentioned, but the technology, I mean, it's not still there. And in your experience, Isabel, you are working with industry, so you may know about these tools and what are they doing. And Prokopios, on your turn, ENISA carried out some studies on the maturity of these tools. So my question for the panel, this panel is about techniques, would be, is the technology ready for adoption now? I mean, we are talking about privacy-enhancing technologies, and this is a big word for many different things, but some of them are not mature enough for application at industry level. So what are your thoughts about when will be available or generally available tools to support all these developments?
I see already some good positive implementations. But it's a complex question because it's not in itself a technology. I mean, it's not like one size fits all with these technologies. What you see in practice is you still need to do a lot of customization. And yeah, I will say that what I see in practice is more where it has to improve is all the rest, all the foundation. So probably we are just not ready in other terms, and not just specifically about the different paths or any other technology that you might use. So it's really contextual. What I also see is that it really depends on, you see like in the financial sector, some things work better because they already have a lot of standards, compliance, infrastructure much more ready than could be other sectors without having that specific requirements, so to say. And so that facilitates, of course, the implementation of this type of technologies. But we are still a long way to go. I see anyways, I would say since last year, I'm more positive. I see much more also solutions appearing on the market. But like I always say, it's not only about the solution. You need to really understand what you are implementing. And I'm happy to see, like I say, the solutions coming on the market, but it's really not only about the technology. There's much more. I mean, we have seen it today here. Legal, at organization level, there's so many things to arrange. Yeah, there are complex implementations. Not an easy one.
Well, in terms of standards, you saw on the slide the standard on secure multi-party computation, which was published this year. But this does not represent that the state of technology is there, so it hasn't been standardized yet, at least with the formal standardization process. But yeah, I would be a bit cynical and say, well, data spaces are popping up here and there, so I think the pets also need to catch up.
I would also like to address one part of the question by first mentioning also, because you mentioned the maturity initiative from ENISA in the past, I would also like to mention the work performed by the colleagues at EDPS at a similar level on analysis of the technologies, and for example also some of the work being done by data protection authorities such as the Spanish one or the ULD one, since I see Marit here. Perhaps I'm forgetting somebody, but trying to be a little bit provocative, but in a good way, I would answer that the technologies will mature when there is a market for them. So, and I'm saying this being conscious that it might sound bad, but technology and the community itself can only take the technologies up to a certain point. At least in the cybersecurity domain, and now I'm capitalizing on some recent discussions we had, the market considers that they are ready to support, they have all the development and research in place to support any request for a client in terms of functionalities or technologies. I don't know if this argument holds or not, but I would assume that if a data controller or an intermediary shows up to a company and says, look, I need you to implement for me this secure multi-party computation, as an example, solution for X amount of budget, I'm sure this company would be more than happy to support this. I would again attempt to be a little bit provocative, but in a good way, by saying that perhaps we are all excited about the envisioned benefits of a technology that we don't really understand in practice, like the secure multi-party computation, or we have not really seen how it actually works. And we tend to forget how our old tools, our existing tools, how good they're working, and we're just trying to solve new problems with new technologies, when perhaps existing technologies could also solve the problem. Again, I'm saying this, acknowledging I'm being a little bit provocative, but I would just bring also the example of synthetic data, which it seems like a very promising technology. We have been discussing it also with some of the panelists here, and the colleagues from EDPS have also published something, but personally, I know companies offering synthetic data solution based on libraries, but I haven't seen it work in practice in a way that I can configure on different data sets the outcome so that I understand what is the level of granularity and protection being offered. So I'm trying to say that we don't really know how to actually use this technology and what is their actual benefit. As a concluding remark, please.
Well, I am Alberto. I am the CEO of Curatio, and to give a little bit of light to this discussion, as we speak, we have deployed several federated learning solutions in some of the largest banks and insurers here in Spain. So the technologies are working. Obviously, if you talk about secure multi-party computation or homomorphic encryption, it doesn't work. We haven't seen anything in the market working, because basically it works, but it takes years to compute something. So our dream at some point is to compute everything in an encrypted form, and that will be the objective of anybody researching in this field. But the reality is that right now technologies like federated learning in combination with differential privacy that you have already mentioned, and canonymity or other techniques are good enough and have the performance to be deployed in different environments. For example, Google is using Spain to deploy their federated learning solutions. The last deployment of a federated learning model on millions of devices was tested in Spain in combination with differential privacy. So I think Spain is being, for some kind of a strange reason, the center of many of these technologies lately. And as I can attest, currently some of the largest banks and insurers are using this kind of what you call data spaces to exchange data, and to collaborate without being, while preserving data privacy and confidentiality of data. So there are many technologies, like, and you have mentioned as well, synthetic data. That doesn't have a lot of use cases, because there are recent research right now that if you use synthetic data to train deep learning models, you are making them dumb over time. So that's the title of the paper. Synthetic data is very useful to test environments. For example, a company is trying a new tool and they want to test the compatibility, if everything works right or not. They will use synthetic data to try this. But if you want to use synthetic data to compute or get insights, sometimes you are fooling yourself and it's not useful enough to use that. So there is no silver bullet from our experience. There are solutions, as Isabel was mentioning, and they need to combine new technologies with methods and contracts and different things that you can put in place in order to protect the confidentiality and privacy of data. But technology, the technology is working. It's harder to find the use cases and the willingness of the companies to exchange data.
Yeah, I would like to add to that it's a pity that big tech is having these big departments of privacy engineers implementing multi-party computation, federated learning in the ads systems, like they mentioned. I mean, I would like to see these papers and see how well it really works in practice. Anyways, having these infrastructures is obviously much easier to test and to, but you know, Alberto, how difficult can this be? So yeah, I think it's really contextual. Like you said, there's no silver bullet, there's no one size fits all, and we have to keep doing an effort. I mean, ideally, I mean, the strategy is to share data, right? I mean, we will need to find a way to do it respecting human rights and still that is for everybody available. I mean, and not just a technology that is available only for a few and not even in Europe. So how to do that? Not sure yet. I think maybe we still need to, but we have like the same in cybersecurity, right? I mean, we can keep requesting extra requirements, but still there's so much lack of expertise, lack of resources, and operational costs. So, so yeah, let's keep, but let's keep trying. That's the only way. Keep trying.
I will take this as the closing statement from Isabel, since I realize we're a little bit over time. Perhaps any last closing statement from Marie-Charlotte or Irene?
Yes, I think what's fascinating here is that we see the theoretical approach, and each time we look at the theory, it seems to be pretty simple. And when you put your hands into it and have all those tiny residual questions that are supposed to be operational hiccup, it takes months to move on. So let's stick to your optimistic view, Isabel, and say, let's keep trying.
I think it's also a matter of incentive, right? So yeah, we can keep trying, but if those that have the means don't, then it's never going to happen. So I'm always in favor of enforcement and fines, but I shouldn't go there, I understand now. So I think a good balance between carrots and sticks is always my motto. So yeah, it also needs to be a regulatory enforcement so that those that have the means actually take the effort to implement PETs and
investment in research.
Yes, and investment, yes, of course. Yes, good.
Many thanks to the three of you for this very interesting discussion and your insights. And many thanks to all of you here and the ones attending remotely for joining us up until now. This part of the conference with the panel discussion is now over. We have to thank our remote participants for joining us and staying here up until now. Perhaps I would give the floor to the
Okay. Well, as mentioned, Prokopios, the first part of the session today finished, because we are going to cut the transmission, the broadcasting through streaming, and now we are going to start the practical working table sessions that will take place in the other room, in the next room. So, according to the agenda, we have 8 different working tables with different dedicated to specific key points. The first one is for actors, stakeholders, and roles. The second one for risk management and data protection impact assessment. The third one for data subject right. The fourth, transparency and accountability. The fifth for data protection officers. 6 is for enforcement and supervisory authority. The 7 for technology and data sharing. In the 8th table for data breaches and security measures. And well, any of you are invited to move to the table you have assigned for. I have to remind you that you must keep confidentiality of the session, and that the result of these workspaces, do not compromise the decision of the Data Protection Authority. So at the end, as a result of the entire session, and especially this working group, it is expected to release a report with the conclusion of the day. So I invite you just to move to the next room, and it is foreseen to finish this session I think at 4:30. Then we will make a break and the wrap-up session. Okay.